All right, we're recording. I've got Sarina Gibbon with me.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks for joining. And the last question she asked me just before I hit record was, do you edit this afterwards? And we don't. So, yeah, sorry. So I think folks on the Facebook group, the large Facebook group, will know me. I'm one of the admins. I also co-run Auckland Property.
Yeah.
And I'm as involved as I in the local Property Investors Association, etc. I've been doing this for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of nights ago, Andrew Bruce, who, forgive me if I get the title wrong, I think he's the president of Auckland Property Investors Association.
Yeah.
Came down and spoke with us, and he has a really cool investor story and fantastically colourful clothing. And it was just really good to chat with him. And then the next day I said, hey, look, you're in town, let's go for breakfast. So Andrew and I are having breakfast. And we're talking about everything, including the RTA. And he said, look, Nick, you got to talk to Sarina about this. She's doing a ton of work for us, putting information out there, collating what's happening, what the changes are, what people need to do. And she's getting more and more fired up.
That's a polite way of putting it.
So, yeah, I think that was the PC term. Well, I called you yesterday and I said, well, you know, Sarina, you seem really passionate about, and I think you said, I'm pissed off. So let's
tell people that I have an image to protect.
Yeah, well, anyway, we're here to dispel images.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be great to hear from you. And Sarina, you work full-time for Auckland Property.
So I'm the general manager at the Auckland Property Investors Association.
Right.
And we're one of the, I believe, a network of 19 property investor associations around the country, to which one of them you're very active in. So thank you for all of your hard work.
No worries. And I know Sarina through having done a couple of webinars.
Yeah.
And I'll be up there in May telling my jokes. And it's a really professionally run organization. If anyone's in Auckland and is looking for a way to learn more about investment, pop along.
Thank you.
Particularly May.
Particularly May.
Yeah, particularly May.
It'll be a good one.
May's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
But it's a really well-run operation. And the reason I'm interested to have this conversation is, Sarina, you're not like on the board of these organizations. You're not paid to go out to the media and put a slant on a story. You're not you're not a lobbyist.
No.
You're someone who's, through your work, just like any of us or regular people, you've just worked through this and you've just gotten more and more like, this is not good. This is a bad thing that's coming. And so I'm really fascinating to just hear, you know, the background of how you've sort of gone through this and how these opinions have sort of formulated, and perhaps it'll make it easier for folks watching this video afterwards to sift through all the different articles and write-ups and recordings and, you know, official statements and legislation to form their own opinion, and if they want to submit or object or support, how they do it.
Sure.
And that's all the introduction I think we need. I'm going to hand it over to you, Sarina. I thought maybe you start with the background of just like how you got to the point where we're having this conversation about this topic.
Yeah, no. Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's really a wonderful opportunity. We appreciate because we need to get the message out there and get good quality information out there, because what is in front of Parliament at the moment. So the full name of the bill, and I often just refer to the number. The full name of the bill is the 2181 Residential Tenancies Amendment, excuse me, Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. And it was introduced in February. It's currently sitting in front of Select Committee. The Select Committee has opened it up for public submission written submission until midnight, 25th of March. That is a couple of Wednesdays coming up from now. And after they've reviewed the written submission, taken an oral submission, they're going to recommend some tweaks into the wording of the bill. It's going to go through the normal legislative process of a second and third reading before it gets royal assent. So, you know, normal run-of-the-mill stuff for bills to become law. Now, what is really important for landlords to know about is that this this piece of legislation is introducing some sweeping changes around the way we landlord is, and these changes I feel are so significant, and the level of information out there and the level of engagement out there is so disproportionately low, and we are just becoming increasingly concerned that not enough people know about it or care about it or think that they will be affected by it enough to speak up against it. And the window is closing. So landlords and tenants and anyone who live in the vicinity of rental properties that's going to have their lives affected by this law have until the 25th of March to really push back against it. In terms of what the sort of overarching objectives this piece of legislation is proposing to do, look, they're all really good things in my opinion. We're talking about giving people security of tenure, longer term tenancy. We're talking about empowering tenants, giving them more control within the rental property, within the rental market, within the rental law system. I don't have a problem with that. We're talking about modernizing New Zealand rental law. Again, don't have a problem with that. What we're very concerned about are the ways by which this piece of legislation is proposing to achieve these objectives. And I think it's going to sort of create some very sort of wonky, distorted outcomes. So that's really broad brush the background people need to be aware of. Would you like me to cover the sort of major changes?
Let's dive in.
Okay, cool. Look, this isn't a digest of the bill at all because it is a beefy piece of legislation. It does take a long time to go through, but broad brush, what you need to be aware of is the bill is 2181 is introducing some dramatic changes to the way landlords terminate a tenancy. In fairness, I should say dramatic changes in the way tenancy termination is going to work for landlords and tenants. But if you dive into it, you will see that most of the changes have more significant impact on the landlord's control over the termination process than the tenants. So very mindful of that. Second thing to be mindful of is the landlord's control over the manner in which a fixed term tenancy is going to roll into a periodic tenancy. And so that control there is going to be greatly diminished. And meanwhile, the tenant, you could argue that the tenant's control over the same matter of how fixed term rolls into a periodic tenancy is either being kept the same or increased. So there's a fairness argument in there and there's a risk argument in there to be aware of. Things that we're not terribly worried about are things like rent bidding is going to be outlawed. I personally don't.
Who does that?
Well, personally, I think rent bidding is distasteful. So
yeah, I hear about it, and I don't particularly cry for those people who engage in it and no longer can.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I think, you know, in the business of running Property Investors Association, we deal with landlords day to day. And by and large, I don't see it as something people particularly care for or rely on. Rent increase regularity is going down to once a year only. Not something our members lose sleep over, but be mindful of it because if you rely on it, you should know. Minor changes, so tenants will be able to put up shelves, put in some minor changes in the property to make it more like their home. Again, nothing massive there, but ideally we'd like to see sort of more clearer language around, you know, health and safety obligations, that sort of stuff. I think the wording of the bill is a bit issue-wishy and it's, you know, not easy.
I have concerns around this because the obligations of the tenant as they leave the property are to make good, or might not even that specific wording. I think someone pointed out that the wording is different from make good, deliberately different.
Yeah.
And which all sounds fine except for when the tenant just ups and leaves. And you've got a bond and you can't do it from the bond. Now you've got a whole nother kerfuffle on your hand and you have to go through a tribunal process and it's not well defined. And
yeah,
etc.
And look, in a way, I agree with you. And I think, like I mentioned before, I find the wording of the clauses around minor changes problematic because they could be more clear. The demarcation between what is a minor change and what is not a minor change, again, could be more clear. So there is a bit of a sort of push and pull there. And I think it speaks more to a landlord's tolerance for changes being made in rental properties. So as a broad brush, as a organization, we just like the language to be tidied up. Name suppression. So claimants or respondents at the tenancy tribunal who's largely successful could have their name suppressed. I think it's more geared towards protecting, or it's being marketed more as a protection for tenants, but in an actual fact, that right is also being afforded to landlords. So there's suppression is in there now. There's a minor thing around fiber installation you need to be aware of. There's the introduction of the infringement offense regime, which I hope to touch on a bit later. So that's
yes, please. I don't think people understand this.
Oh, good. We can talk about that, but that's a concurrent concept to unlawful act. It's not. There's some spin out there making it sound terrible. Not true. So look, those are the big ticket items. Are there anything you want me to sort of unpack a bit more?
No, I think I had a conversation with Sharon Colwick, who is, and I have to get this right, the acting president.
Oh no, sorry, she's the executive officer.
The executive officer, right.
Yeah,
got to get that right. And she started to talk to me a little bit about the associated party rules, which, for the way the penalties are applied, they're different if you're a professional landlord or you're not, and it's done on the number of properties you have, but it's not done on the number of properties you have.
Yeah.
If you have 6 siblings and you'll have a property each, guess what? Each of you is going to be graded and penalized as a professional landlord. And stuff like this. Now, I haven't dug into it since that conversation.
Yeah.
If you've done any work on that, when we get to that point, it'll be good to bring up. If not, then I can just go away and do some clarification myself and include it.
Yeah, no, I definitely need to go away and do some clarification because that's not something that immediately stood up to me when I went through the infringement category, and perhaps Sharon's more learned in that space. But definitely there is the concept of scaling that if you have more than, I believe if you have more than five or 6 tenancies, then you're penalized in a different way.
Yes, and the idea is that everyone sort of suddenly gets lumped into this, potentially because an associated party, like a relation, like family, and I think the word is whānau. Or some whānau and something else, where, if I've got 4, for example, and my cousin has 2, and he's self-managing and doesn't know what he's doing and gets it wrong, he gets penalized.
I will put a pin in that, and we'll definitely look into it and create some content on our information that's coming out on the APIA website very fast. So we definitely will look into that.
I mean, if you zoom out, really, the law is the law. You need to obey the law. So, but let's start at the big changes with the removal of the no clause termination, and also the other one that's causing a lot of concern is the changes around fixed term tenancies.
Sure. So look, a little bit of background around this whole big hoo-ha over 90 days. So couple of years ago, the then fairly newish government came out and said, look, we're going to reform, I believe reform's the word they used, we're going to reform residential tenancy. There's so many problems with it. They did a massive consultation. And in that consultation, there was a suggestion that the 90-day notice, the landlord's ability to issue a 90-day notice to terminate a tenancy without proffering a reason behind the termination is creating a lot of uncertainty and instability in the rental market and not giving tenants enough security in their own home. So on the basis of that, they started making a lot of moves in the media around messaging 90-day notice as a tool that landlord relies on every single day and issue willy-nilly to create disruption in tenants' home. Therefore, it is untenable and it is unfair and it has to go. in response to that, the New Zealand Property Investors Federation, as well as other property organizations, did a lot of media comments and social pushback around the 90-day notice and just educating the public around exactly how it's being used. So to be clear, 3%, it's been found that 3% of tenants per year receive a 90-day notice to terminate. Even though notices do not come with a reason, it doesn't mean there's no reason behind it. Landlords don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm just gonna terminate on my tenant for no reason.
I want to have a vacancy. That sounds like a good.
Yeah, like, because, you know, we get into this trade to stop our own cash flow and make a tax loss. I don't know in what world that makes sense.
Well, some accountants, but yeah.
So mad. It is.
Let's
It's
not
just
go there. Let's not get down there. Right.
No. And look, people watching this, they don't buy into that anyway. But I think there is that massive social pressure around. I mean, even just, I think yesterday or Monday, I came across from a very reputable news outlet that tenant groups are still out there saying, oh, many landlords are issuing 90-day notices so they don't have to fix up our rental, which is insane. I don't know, 3% of tenant gets these notices a day. I don't know in what world 3% means many. I don't know. Anyway, pet gripe, move on. So in response to the government's sort of broad brush way of saying 90-day notices, it's the cause of all evil, it has to go. NZPF came out and said, no, actually, in fact, hardly anyone gets it. 97% of the market doesn't get it. The people who do get it, by and large, are those tenants who exhibit antisocial behavior, who create such disruption in the community that the landlord is left with no recourse but to issue a notice that cannot be challenged and cannot be argued against because they don't have to furnish a reason for it. So in response to that, because they really want to sort of jam this law in, the 2181 proposes the ability for landlords to terminate on antisocial behavior and rent arrears. Now, what I personally am incredibly concerned about is that the talking points that are coming out of tenancy services and HUD and all the other government agencies, there's such insidiousness in the talking points. It's quite dangerous because all they say is, oh, landlords, we're taking away the 90-day notice to terminate. But don't worry, you can still terminate on antisocial behavior and rent arrears. That makes a lot of people who don't pay attention to these things think that this piece of legislation is going to afford them the protection they need, the same remedies they have anyway. So taking away the 90-day becomes immaterial to them. I am here to put to everybody that it is actually super important to be aware of the rules relating to persistent rent arrears and antisocial behavior, your right to terminate. There's a 3-strike concept. And basically within a 90-day period, if we're talking about antisocial behavior, within a 90-day period, you have to jump through several hoops. Your tenant has to be antisocial on 3 separate occasions. On all 3 occasions, you have to follow with a notice, and the notice, there's specific formatting and substance requirements to a notice that you have to meet. If you don't meet them, it's no. These notices are open to be challenged at the tenancy tribunal. So each time your tenant gets a notice, and if they know the system very well, they're empowered to, and they have access and means and opportunities, they can take this notice, go to the tribunal and say, I challenge the facts alleged in this notice. More often than not, the neighbor might get involved, because generally neighbors are at the receiving end of antisocial behaviors. Although the provision does account for antisocial behaviors towards the landlord and the landlord's family members. So the neighbor has to front up, give evidence in a very confronting situation. And so I can see most of them probably wouldn't want to do that out of concern for the quality of life. And then the tribunal's got to adjudicate, agree with your narrative. So 3 notices. Then after the 3rd notice, within 28 days, you'll have to apply for termination. And that's assuming that 28 days is enough for you to make sure that you've accounted for all of your risks under the retaliatory notice requirement that got brought in the last time the RTA got amended. So it is not as simple as, hey, I've got an antisocial tenant, 2181 is still letting me get rid of them.
Bye now.
Yeah, no. And also another thing, I think also out of decency, I think it's important for landlords to let all of your neighbors know something terribly important about this provision is not only would you be put in a situation where if a neighbor wants to see a tenant gone because the tenant has been persistently antisocial and the neighbor is supporting the landlord through the process, this neighbor has to be prepared to possibly front up to the tribunal, give evidence, which again, confronting situation for a lot of people. And if the neighbor doesn't feel comfortable doing that, and there's a witness summon out there for this neighbor, and the neighbor doesn't answer the summon, the fine for that goes up from $2,000 to $3,600. So we're putting neighbors in the between a rock and a hard place, and that's something I think it's really important, not just for landlords to be aware of, but also to inform existing neighbors of all of your rental properties that this law coming in doesn't just impact myself and my tenant, it actually impacts you.
So let's do a hypothetical scenario. I've owned properties in rough streets, and I've always had my properties managed, but I believe in the past we have used one of these notices. And I live in another city. I've got this house, it's my rental. And so that's the house I used to live in. I grew up in this street, and I moved out, and I kept the rental property as my rental, moved into another area, next town over, which is probably half of the landlords in New Zealand. Own one house, own it in their own name, self-manage, used to be where they lived. All the neighbors around there know who they are, have their numbers.
Probably their first home with a lot of emotional connection to it.
So all that. So anyway, you're in this situation. I'm just trying to figure out what would be the largest number of people affected. And tenant moves in. Typical self-manager, you're a bit of a softie. Let the folks in even though you think, oh, who knows? Or even not, they might move in and be lovely and then just something happens, a partner changes, life changes, there's some stress. Let me pick something. Domestic violence. Yeah. Which is unfortunately in New Zealand is not too difficult to imagine. So there's an incident, all right, police come in. They leave, okay. Then the neighbors are now freaked out. Then there's parties, okay, and you know, bit of noise, etc. The neighbors call you, say, look, you know, such and such is causing these issues. Can you sort it out to your rental? You are a 46-year-old, 5'2" librarian figure, say a woman. You trot to this house, knock on the door, massive unit opens it. You give them this notice, and the grandmother across the fence has complained about the parties. This guy you've never seen before, he's somehow snuck in on the tenancy. Apparently you're allowed to assign tenancies to new people now, so he's in there.
Well, put a pin in that, because yes and no, misinformation a bit out there, but go on.
But I'm trying to figure out, like in a real world scenario, like what could happen? Like, so now what do they, so you're in your mid-40s and you've got one rental and you've got a job and kids and busy in this other town, you have to deal with this incident, and the neighbors have raised it, and there's been parties and some unfortunate, you know, domestic disputes. You have to then go to the tribunal.
Yes.
And they can challenge it. So then the neighbor has to front up.
Yes, if there's required.
And say, because otherwise you have to provide evidence, right? You live in Hamilton and the incident happened. And
of course.
So if you haven't got any evidence, you're out. So someone has to testify, because no one's going to pull out their iPhone over the fence and take a video.
Yeah, of course.
Of this thing. Now, each time this happens, that same person has to then go in and testify. In the meantime, they are living in a house next to the house.
They have to go home living next door.
Next to the house where
Yes.
this guy is now, who has somehow entered the space.
By the way, is in control of your asset.
Who now has control of your assets and know that you'd like to leave, and he's in the house with all of your valuable chattels and fixtures and fittings and everything. And if you then go and issue further notices, they can even challenge it as being retaliatory. This sounds like a very big mess that's coming.
I just think whoever came up with these, and this is, I think this is what I hope to sort of describe what a lot of our members are feeling deep down, why they're feeling resentful about these changes and this increased onslaught and hostility against landlords, in at least in the public discourse, is if you think about termination, right? Essentially what 2181 is saying, and the people who support 2181, essentially what they're saying is, when it comes to termination, a landlord terminating, there must be a presumption of guilt. If a landlord cannot be trusted to give a 90-day notice, that the landlord has a good reason to give that 90-day notice, then the presumption is always that should you be terminating a tenancy, your intention must be bad, right? Unless you are able to prove to the tribunal and society that your reason fits within what we consider to be acceptable and have codified into the RTA. Your reason must be bad. If you are a tenant who has been accused of being antisocial, the presumption is that you are innocent until the landlord and the neighbor are able to prove to such a high threshold that you are indeed antisocial. So landlords can't make, and I think that's what inherently is putting a lot of pressure on the ma and pa landlords, because, nobody gets into the business of landlording thinking, I'm going to game the system, take advantage of people, and profit off of that. I don't believe that's people's intent. But the messaging that we're getting from these changes in legislation is very much around, we presume you have malintention, and we presume your tenants are victims. And from there, we're going to legislate. And I think it's sort of, not only does it not create a more modern and fairer rental system in New Zealand, it's creating a lot of resentment for landlords. And it's not healthy. You're not encouraging landlords and tenants to engage with each other in good faith.
No, and I think a big thing I see is, and it's a really good perspective, that the attitude from which this whole legislation has been drafted up is that these people have a powerful position which they intend to abuse.
Abuse, yes.
We need to not allow them to ever do this, or make it very difficult, because that's just the human nature of these. I mean, it sounds like I'm reading a Green Party political campaign ad. Your landlord's coming for you. But I think the incentivizing as a rental owner, the biggest thing this tells me is I should not give people who I can perceive to see problems with, potentially based on a demographic, a chance to live in my house. The risk is too big. Yes,
there is that. And I will put to you that sort of takes away from the overall culture of landlords in New Zealand, because when we, at APIA we have about 1,000 members. When we talk to our landlords, they know their tenant story. They understand that this is a human business. They're doing business with people with everyday lives, and it's never, the approach is always like a balance between what is business and what is human. And I think your reaction is exactly what we're hearing from landlords, is that, oh, okay, whereas in the past I sort of have this attitude of, oh, he'll be all right, he's got a couple of debt issues on there, there's a couple of red flags on their credit report, you know, but someone needs to give them a second chance. Seems like a good person, you know, and I think when you sort of legislate this way, and you still have an environment where really property in New Zealand is still the number one option that Kiwis choose to build a better financial future. So there's no I put to you that there's really no sort of other viable option alternatives. So people are still going to be investing, right? Like the people who are able to hold on to their rental portfolio will continue to hold on to their rental portfolio, but the way they landlord is going to change because now all of a sudden they're exposed to way more risk. So like yourself, you're now saying, okay, I'm going to be really strict around how I select tenants, but even that doesn't entirely ring fence you from potential antisocial behaviors, because most antisocial behaviors comes out like as a response to stresses in life.
Yeah.
So how are you ever going to foresee that, right? Things around, you know, we're hearing stories around talked about here about landlords thinking, you know, if this does get passed within that 6-month window between getting the bill getting royal assent and it being enforced, would it be in my interest to just terminate and re-vet all of my tenants? And we don't want to see that. That creates a great deal of disruption, which, by the way, doesn't at all bring security of tenure to anybody, right?
I completely agree. I mean, I'm sort of paraphrasing what I hear because I have a lot of conversations with a lot of investors about this. And the big one is people are just saying, okay, well, my typical tenant is, you know, it might be a young family with few, what's the word? Oh, they haven't lived in other tenant properties before. So they don't have any like
no robust history.
Yeah, no history of living, and you know, they might be going for their first job. Might be a solo mum who's working hard and trying to raise her kids, and I just see people and everyone's got different imaginations. You might read one story in the Herald one day about how somebody moved into a property and trashed it. The next person who roughly matches up with that portfolio, who applies for your house, no, I get it. And it's just complete rubbish. It does exactly the opposite of what these rules are intended to do.
It's incentivizing, to me, it's incentivizing sensationalized and knee-jerk reactions, which
paranoia.
Yeah, which on the one hand, if the intention of us as a society is to make renting a more professional space, and you know, I think being a rental property owner is running a business. It should be more professional, and I think any mechanisms that get introduced requiring people to be uplifted to that standard, that's all good. But if we don't correspondingly demand that from our tenants, and continue to pile on all of these additional business risks onto landlords, I just don't see it being a feasible outcome for your typical mom and pop investors to continue to remain in this market. That is going to give them all the risks, but keep a lid on their rewards. So, you know.
Not good.
Not good. Not good.
Summarized. Sorry, it's paraphrasing.
Yeah, can you just like cut the last 10 seconds out and say, this is what you need to know about 2181?
Not good. Not good. Let's talk about fixed term tenancies. If we're ready to move on to that.
Yeah, sure. So look, again, I think I mentioned before, the wording of this bill is tricky. It's tricky. Going through it is a massive exercise, and definitely not my intention here to sort of go into all the nitty gritties. Like we have, I believe, Nick, you'll kindly offer to link into the show notes some of the resources that we've put out there for landlords to consume. So
yes, and I'd like it maybe at the end of this conversation, you just give me a run through of a high level, like use this to do this, use this to do this.
Yeah, of course. So we've got we've sort of fixed term. I'm going to sort of keep my narrative to very broad brush, simple things that you need to understand. But there's stuff on our website that, you know, for those of you interested in it, you can definitely go and geek out on it.
And that's
or you
been
want
made publicly available. You don't need
Yeah.
to be a member of Auckland Property Investors.
Definitely. But high level, what you need to be knowing about is currently a fixed term tenancy rolls automatically into a periodic tenancy. That's already happening. Unless
Yep.
notices are given crisscross, landlords and tenants both have sort of equal right to give notice to discontinue on expiry. And then there are also other mechanisms around early termination orders can be made through the tribunal for hardship reasons, and then I think reasonable compensation follows, that sort of stuff. The main change for 2181 is proposing is that they are now saying the landlord's ability to unilaterally give a notice to discontinue the fixed term tenancy, so essentially to stop the rollover during the tenancy, that ability to give that unilateral notice is being taken away. Meanwhile, then they're keeping that same right for tenants. So what we're talking about now is, the government is essentially coming in, putting their thumb on the scale, tipping the control more in the hands of tenants. And look, we can go all days debating the rightness and wrongness of it. But I think for the purpose of running a landlord's business, landlords need to be aware that your control is being diminished and there are business consequences. And I think, Nick, you're a landlord of fixed term tenancies. Knowing that, how do you see your portfolio be affected?
Oh, wow. I'm supposed to be doing this interview. So I own student rentals, and the way I'm reading this is that the way it's going to affect student rentals, and I'll zoom out. So the student rentals are 12-month fixed term leases, February to February. So when the students turn up, they get a house for the whole year, and it's a trade-off. They get a house, they get 4 or 5 adults, one in each room or 2. And they do a 12, landlords ask for a 12-month lease because the university calendar finishes in November, and no one's really interested in letting a property for 10 months a year. So now we're being told that this is automatically going to tick over to a periodic lease, and that the students or people in it could then give their regular notice and leave at any time. So landlords who own these rentals, where the whole market, and this isn't just student rentals, it's like basically any properties in and around the areas around universities, tends to move to a 12-month lease, because that's when people come in and out of their previous accommodation, and that's when people move. I might suddenly have a property come back in August. Now, you're not going to see any articles on stuff.co.nz bemoaning the lack of student rentals in Wellington City in August. Everyone's got their houses.
Yeah.
So I then have everyone's, they're locked in for you. So I then now have this property that I paid a lot of money for, have a very large amount of debt, etc. And I've got 7 or 8 months to figure out what to do. Now I can put somebody in on low rent for the rest of the year. I've done that before when I've done a big project and it finishes in May or June. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you a discount for the rest of this year, and then next year it goes back to the normal cycle. But now I'm being told that I can't do that, because the people I get on low rent, their fixed term is going to end, and it's going to roll over to a periodic, and I can't put my rent back up to market rent because it hasn't been 12 months. It's going to come back 12 months up in August, which is back in the slump of the midwinter thing, and it's going to throw a lot of stuff out of whack in that respect. And I think a lot of people are a bit scared about this.
Yeah, and to interject, I think, again, higher level, I think a lot of landlords get into particularly those landlords who are, for business reasons, require higher level of planning and anticipating seasonal patterns, personal life challenges that they could foresee, such as, if you move away for work for a year, and a lot of people are in that situation, they get an overseas contract, rent their house out for the duration of that contract. So they get themselves in a fixed term tenancy situation to accommodate that planning requirement. I think not then finding themselves in a situation of losing control over how that fixed term is treated could create disruptions.
I think I read a list the other day. I mean, And I just did a bit of a Google on here, and there's over 400,000 students. And I think that lumps in Polytech, University, International in New Zealand. Hopefully I've done the search right. If I've not, it's definitely over 200,000. And seasonal workers, holiday homeowners. So if you own a batch in the Coromandel and you want to use it for 3 weeks each summer and the rest of the year you're happy to rent it out as long as you can get it for those 3 weeks. Effectively now, what I'm reading from this law is the only way I can maintain that control is to convert it to an Airbnb. So take the house away from the rental market and have it on short-term let basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't forget all of this talk about fixed term tenancy, the control issue that relates to fixed term tenancies of over 90 days. So
yeah,
the bill also introduces the concept of a short fixed term tenancy.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to let me with my students have consecutive 90-day.
No, of course not. Students are definitely long.
Yeah, you know, because you have to end the tenancy at 90 days, and people actually have to move out. And the next one have to move in. It's sort of like a motel operation. So those consent rules around that. And I just think, again, markets like Tauranga, not Tauranga, Mount Wanganui, Whangamata, which you hear people describe as like a giant Airbnb. The remaining rentals, if people want to have any kind of use or access to, they're going to disappear. What I can see just from, you look at what behaviors are being incentivized. There are people who had properties that they were happy to lend to students on this market cycle. They might decide to repurpose their assets into another way.
Yeah.
So you can just see what's going to happen with this. And it's the same thing that happens every time any new rules come in, is the rich are going to get richer and the rest are going to leave the market. Those who have several rentals, have strong cash flow, have low debt, are well set up, established players, are going to be able to ride this through. You know, if I have a 3-month vacancy in one of my rentals, I'm going to be irritated.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be forced to sell it at mortgagee. You know, that sort of, I could probably have all 3 properties vacant for 2 months and be fine. I know I'm in the lucky few. And I think there's a lot of people who have one rental or one batch or something else, and they've really, really pushed themselves to get into this. And they really, really need to make it work because it is their retirement plan on top of their KiwiSaver, etc. And now they're going to be sitting there going, what on earth is happening? So that to me seems like the behaviours, if this comes through as proposed, and I've heard rumours that they're open to discussion around, you know, like student rentals and special markets, etc. However, I don't know how far that's going to go, because I mean, if you look at the Auckland City apartment market and other markets that are sort of in and around these areas, a lot of these other properties just naturally merge with 12-month sort of letting cycle.
And I agree with you, and I think, you know, fundamentally, I'm inherently distrustful, or I should probably say I'm inherently don't have confidence in this habit of legislating by patchworking problems, you know.
Yeah.
So going back to the antisocial thing, that's a patch, right? In order to bootleg the 90-day notices into the system and come across as having responded to a legitimate concern raised by landlords around antisocial behavior and having have to rely on the remedy of the 90-day notice, they're saying, okay, we're going to patch this up with this fix here, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't encourage a culture for landlords and tenants to engage in good faith.
No, I just have this story. Sorry, I probably went down too far on that. It's like, you know, a little old lady and the grandmother next door suddenly having to trot along to the tenancy tribunal 3 times in 90 days and print out everything in triplicate.
Like, listen, you and I, neither of us are little old ladies. Like, would you go?
I don't want to go and deal with these.
Because I wouldn't.
No, I'm a wuss. I don't get scared by these people. And I'm 6'2", right? So
I'm relying you in a fight.
Yeah, no, I'm no good. So I'll be hiding behind my property manager.
Yeah, so look, and I'm hearing as well, and I think it's legitimate. All of these process requirements, it's just so process heavy for landlords to be able to even rely on, have use of any of these legal remedies, is going to push people into professional property management. Now, that in and of itself, I don't have a problem with it. The the follow-up issue then is property management as an industry isn't regulated. So you're sending landlords in, and you and I both know it's an industry that could be your best investment asset, it would be your best partner or your worst enemy, right? It could be the make or break of your portfolio success. So you're putting all of these compliance requirements onto landlords, forcing landlords to sort of get into a dangerous market space and hoping that it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I don't know, somebody's world is populated by unicorns. It's not my world. That's all I'm saying.
Unicorns with glitter dust. Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is very fanciful, and what they've come up with. Are any of the other topics that are on the slate of this level of concern? I mean, these are the two that people are talking about.
Look, there are two big things, and for those of you who sort of stayed with us long enough to listen to all of this, thank you very much. This isn't it. There's a lot of changes in there. Definitely. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. That is making even the sort of semi-engaged landlords think that this isn't something they need to worry about. This is absolutely something all of us should worry about. Now, would you like me to just maybe go through some of the, because one thing I'm very excited about is we started running as a side gig a fact-checking service for 2181.
So you guys have fact-checked this. This is like the
We are fact-checking.
You guys have fact-checked this. I want to see this. So where do I go and read the fact-check thing?
Okay, so we get so many text messages and emails from our members going, I heard this said about 2181. Is it true? And it's just got to a point now where I'm like, do you know what? We're just going to publish everybody's questions and all of our responses. And we're going to do it in a way. We're going to do it in a way so that if you're like really not interested in it, and unlike me, you actually have a life, you could just go read the statement, and most of them would put a one word answer. It's true, false, whatever.
Fake news.
If you want to geek out, most of the answers have links into further analysis and commentary. And, I'll leave it to the readers out there to sort of decide whether you agree with us or not agree with us, because fundamentally, to me, the biggest problem of 2181 is that it is drafted in such a way that there is a lot of confusion. It's not very clear. The language is not very clear cut. And there's I don't believe anyone is really in a position to say definitively what 2181 means, because the language is problematic. So we have a fact-checking service. It'll be linked in the show notes. The most standout ones are, number one, 2181 is going to increase tenants' control of the rented home and the rental market. I put to you that if you really think about it, the way landlords are going to respond to these challenges of increased risks and ability losing control over who stays on in their rental property, the way they're going to respond logically is they're either going to take their rental property out of the pool, right? They'll just be like, too much for us, we're out. Or they're going to price the increased risk into their rentals. So straight away, we are taking away tenants' security of tenure. How is a tenant going to, how is that going to improve access to a rental property and affordability to a rental property, right? So if we're talking about tenants' control, none of that is meaningful if they can't get into a rental. So
this is my argument against this whole thing. I think the criteria to get into a rental property is going to become a lot higher.
Yes, definitely.
People are going to hand their rental properties over to property managers who, let's just for now assume that they have proper letting systems and vetting systems, etc. And they're going to be holding them to the same higher standard. So one or the other is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen straight away, it'll happen when they go through this whole get my neighbour, go to the tribunal circus.
Yeah.
The second thing is my only tool really is to price the risk in, particularly student. You know, if I've got 6 students in my rental and they want to go to periodic, I'm going to be looking at the market rent and going right to the top band of what I can legally charge, and that's what they're getting. And I can tell you that now, hand on heart. I'm going to do that for every rental. I have 6 of them.
Yeah.
Buying another couple every year because because I'm assuming that I'm going to have 3 months vacancy at some point. I need to price it in. I'm not going to spend the money as it comes in. It can pull up, and if I do have the 3-month vacancy, then that'll pay the mortgage, because the bank's not going to give me a 3-month mortgage holiday because of this law.
Yeah. So to any tenants listening out there, listening to this, you know, before you celebrate this law as being a piece of legislation that's for tenants, just have a think. What is the meaning of control when you can't even be a tenant?
Well, there's a social contract, and I see this with a lot of landlords. If you go into the large Facebook property investor chat group, and you'll see a lot of questions, and this, I invite tenants to have a look at this, people who live in rental accommodation, have a look at the advice that people give each other around putting up rent. Many properties in New Zealand, I would say the vast majority of properties are rented to people for less than what you call market rent on Trade Me. You know, on Trade Me, you look at what it is. And everyone else is at some point under that. And you get into a property and it'll cruise along for a few years. And a lot of owners who've got 1 or 2 are like, you know, I'm in a good position. I own the house. I feel fine. It helps them out. They're looking after the property. They're good people.
Yeah.
And when the penny drops that the person in the house you might not have that intention, it's just the perception of like the partner that could come along in 6 weeks and move in and do stuff, that they need to charge money ahead of time to cover the damage that is probably going to happen and they're not going to be able to deal with. I think we're going to see a very rapid catch up on rents across New Zealand. Yeah.
And so look, I think that's a massive lie that's being paddled around about 2181. Another thing I want to talk about is there's rumors out there that landlords are going to become criminals. You are not.
Oh, good. Yeah,
I just want to be very clear on this. We get honestly, you will not believe, we get so many phone calls about this. Okay, so the idea that I think what is confusing people, tripping people up, is the concept of the infringement offense regime that is now being sort of going hand in hand with unlawful act. And without making this into a law lecture, think of this as a speeding ticket. When you commit an infringement and you get an infringement notice with a financial penalty, much like a speeding ticket, you pay that penalty, you are not convicted. It is not on your record, even though the bill does talk about charging paper. It is also explicit in the explanatory notes that nobody will be convicted. So everyone settle down, okay? Think about it this way. If you get caught speeding, you get a ticket, you pay that ticket, but you're not a criminal. It's very much the same way here. So I think anybody out there who is riling up landlords over this whole criminalization issue and getting people to make submissions against this on the basis of being criminalized, look, your submission is just going to be ignored. So be very careful around that. I think the commentary around 2181 is going to bring about fairness in the rental system because it takes away the 90-day notice. The suggestion that landlords go around every day issuing 90-day notice, that simply just isn't true.
The only time you issue it is if it doesn't make sense. I can't even think, and it's only for when you've got a tenant who's causing problems where you would feel physically at risk going in and trying to deal with this
for the
stuff.
sake of expedience, for the sake of expedience and smooth transitioning in and out of tenancies. Look, this is and this is why I think for the people out there, and I get it, civic engagement isn't the sexiest thing in this world, and people don't get into investing in rental properties to make submissions and talk to their MPs. So there is always that sense of, I am sort of a few steps removed from that process. But this is, and this is what frustrates me, is I see the 90-day notice as a safety net, a legal remedy. And when we think about it, legal remedies are like healthcare, right? You hope like hell you're never gonna need it. But when you do, thank God it's there. And this is at risk of being taken away. If I come to you today, Nick, and I say, I'm taking away your healthcare, are you going to, going to sit there and not take action against, right? So this.
Well, you're giving me more control of my health.
Yeah, well, this super relaxed attitude around, oh, listen, if 3% of tenants get a 90-day notice, and chances are, as a landlord, I'm never going to have to issue it. So why do I care if it's there or not, if I'm never going to use it, right? So this is why you should care.
You want the insurance plan in place for when the cancer diagnosis comes back bad.
Yeah, exactly. Good job carrying on with the metaphor.
Right.
Cool. So look, guys, we're running a fact checker, and I definitely encourage anybody listening to this, if you come across any statements, I mean, we've heard things like 14-day notice to breach is going to be removed. Again, not true. So we're constantly, every day, we're adding stuff to the fact checker. So if you help me populate it, if you've heard something about 181, any interpretation that you're not quite sure about, let us know. We'll create some content out there and just benefit all the landlords so that everyone understands what exactly this law is proposing to do and not do.
Let's talk about the resources that you've put online and what people can do.
Sure. Well, God, it took ages, so I really hope you guys take advantage of it.
No, I'm going to put it at the top of the list and people can just jump into it. But I mean, I want to paraphrase this. The APIA have done a fantastic amount of work, and they've invested money, obviously, in time and resources to do this, put this together. And, you can spend as much time as you want going through this and digging into it. But it's just at a high level, how can people start to learn a bit more about this?
Sure.
And then also just make the submission. And I think you've even put together like an easy template that people can follow to do a submission.
Submission guide. We want to get away from the word template, because I'll talk about that as well.
Right. We don't want them all to look the same.
And there is actually a reason for that. But listen, we have loads of resources out there, and I think, and then it's really designed to accommodate different people with different levels of interest in the subject. So that, I think at the bare minimum, there is the explanatory notes that we've put together. And what we've done is we've taken all the talking points of 2181 from Tenancy Services website. So the government spin, basically. We've taken all of that as a basis. We've expanded on what each of them actually means and how it's going to roll out in practice. We've added in some of the stuff that we think most landlords should also be aware of, such as the nullifying of no assignment clauses. So assignment is not a guaranteed right, just to be clear, but the usual no assignment clause in the tenancy agreement, should 2181 become law, is going to have no effect. It is not illegal to have it in there. It would just have no effect. So we've sort of put in things like that. I think it's a 6-7 page long document.
That's a PDF. I mean, it's going to take 10 minutes to read it.
Yeah,
I mean,
look, I was
10 minutes on, it's worth doing.
I was saying to someone else this morning, like, I reckon reading the explanatory note, going onto the link and putting your submission together should take less time for you to find out who's won this week's MasterChef. So we're not talking about changing lifestyle. Okay.
1/10 of the time that this podcast is taking.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you and I are enjoying this way too much.
I know.
So look, explanatory notes, if you don't want to read anything else, read that. There is a submission guide. It's a pretty beefy document, but once again, you can go through the headlines and sort of decide what you want to read about, because it's really designed for everyone to use. So even if you just want to put in the simplest form of submission, or if you want to expand it out into a more well thought out piece of document for the select committee to consider. So we've got resources in that for you to follow through. There's also a similar guide around how do you, beyond the 25th of March, engage with your MP. So just a reminder, everybody, it's an election year in New Zealand. MPs want to keep their jobs. It's time to leverage off of that. And we've also got put together template letters that landlords can send to neighbors of tenants who are currently antisocial and neighbors of all other tenants. I think if anything, it's, if you don't do anything out of this video, at the very least, send those letters to all the neighbors, because I think it's a decent thing to do. Just let people be aware of that.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of people who aren't landlords and aren't renting, who just look at this and go, all right, well, that's those other people. They can deal with it.
Yeah. And look, I understand that none of this is particularly enjoyable.
Yeah.
And that is why there are people like the Auckland Property Investors Association. It is our job to put these information into digestible pieces, so that you understand what is coming in, how you're going to be affected, and what you can do about it. We're building the resource base very quickly. So what you had said about associated person and infringement, that's not something that stood out to me when I read the bill, but I definitely will go back and look at it again and maybe fact check that too.
It would be interesting, yeah. I mean, Susan, perhaps just have a chat with, not Susan, have a chat with Sharon.
Yeah,
she was the one who brought it up to me.
Yeah.
All right, so what I'm going to do is, so this was a 30-minute digest of the thing that's got about an hour and a half. So I'll probably let you go and get some lunch. Thank you so much for your time. So I'm going to put this obviously on the Facebook group, and some people have suggested some questions. I put up a post yesterday asking people, look, have you got any questions?
Yeah, and we're happy to answer them.
And I got some detailed ones, and it was more, and I haven't gone into those because I didn't think they were questions for you. It was more about, tenancy services and the tenancy tribunal. How is this actually going to be interpreted? Like words like reasonable and
purport to,
workload and all this stuff. It just seems so open to the mood of the person on the day.
I think a lot of that will have to wait till cases go through the tribunal, or even look at practice notes issued by the head adjudicator. So no one, I don't believe anyone can tell you at this point.
Right. So I'm gonna put this up on Facebook group, obviously, and I will share it with Auckland Property. I'll do an audio recording of it, and I'll pop it up on some podcasty sort of thing. No, I think it's really good to get the word out.
Now, may I please wrap up with submission, because it's important. Yeah. Okay, so submission is open until the 25th of March. Make sure you do not miss the deadline. Another thing to be aware of, 2 ways to make a submission. You can either submit by using the web form, which is the easiest way, and I will suggest you do that. Or you can submit by post. Do not submit by email. Do not email your submission into the select committee email address. It is a little bit confusing because the email is also advertised on the submission link, I believe. Do not do that, because unless you have a very good reason not to use the web form or use the postal service, they're not going to accept email submissions. In terms of, I get asked a lot about why doesn't APIA just provide a template? We can't do that because it just takes away the advocacy effort. Templates get ignored completely because that is telling politicians that whoever is putting in a template is just going to flood the numbers, and that it's not a good faith submission. So we don't provide templates. We do, however, have a bank of submissions already made by APIA members that we've made it available again on the resource page for you to look at and get some ideas from. But please do not copy and paste any of that stuff.
Don't plagiarize your submission.
Yeah, don't plagiarize. Look, it doesn't take, no one is telling you to write a novel. It doesn't take much to put down in a cogent manner in 2 words what you're concerned about, how you're going to respond to the increased challenges and all the new challenges, and how is that going to affect tenants and affect tenants, affect the community. And why do you know, if you have any suggestion as to better ways to achieve the outcome that this bill wants to achieve. As a reminder, once again, this bill is talking about increasing the security of tenure specifically for tenants, increasing tenants, empowering tenants, giving them more control within the rental home, within the rental market, and modernizing New Zealand law. So if you, for those of you thinking men and women out there, if you can think of a way that the government can achieve these goals without disproportionately taking away so many rights and remedies from landlords, by all means, put that in the submission. And another thing is stay on point. When I went and reviewed the submission against ring fencing in the omnibus tax bill last year, I was surprised at how many submission was on people saying we don't want to see a capital gains tax when the bill itself doesn't suggest a CGT. So look, stay on point.
All right. We're talking about the RTA amendments, not healthy homes, guys.
Yeah. And don't miss the deadline. I'm inherently, despite my age group, I'm inherently distrustful of technology. Nick, you'll probably laugh at that.
I'm a Luddite, don't worry about it.
Last minute. The website could crash, so don't leave it to the last minute. Do it this weekend.
Okay, brilliant. Cool. All right, so this is going out there, guys. Thank you again, Sarina.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate that.
No worries. I'm gonna stop the recording, and you'll see this on the other side.